So, have any of y'all ever had something that you avoided for the longest time for a stupid reason, then once you passed a certain point you realized that you don't need to avoid it? Then you suddenly wondered why you ever avoided it in the first place? Well, that has been my experience with shoujo manga and anime. I started watching anime way later than most Western anime fans, when I was 19 and when MHA was still in its early seasons. And of course, I quickly became a piece of shonen trash. FMA, MHA, Demon Slayer, and plenty of regrets I'd rather not talk about here. I did become aware of shoujo anime, namely magical girl anime that I considered, but it was never really high on my priority list. Admittedly, that sense of toxic masculinity was telling me that I wasn't allowed to enjoy things made for girls. I was afraid of potential judgment, even when no one was around, but there were a few shoujo series that caught my attention for one reason or another, namely Snow White with the Red Hair, which I watched the opening for, and it seemed really enjoyable. But I kept it at arm's length, until I discovered I was transgender, specifically transfeminine bigender. And then I had an epiphany. Wahaha! Your gender roles are no barrier to me! So I started watching, and in some cases reading, several shoujo series, and I really enjoyed them. This demographic is just as prone to trash as shonen, but I'm pretty careful of what manga or anime I spend my time on, so that really isn't a problem. And after some time, I asked myself, why is it that these series are perceived as unenjoyable or unrelatable for young men? Sure, demographic and genre are mostly there for marketing purposes, helping audiences find stories that they might like, but fans treat demographics like they are hard rules rather than guidelines, and that's needlessly restrictive to me. I didn't see anything in these shoujo manga or anime that struck me as impossible for one of the male mind to enjoy. Granted, my identity does lean more towards the feminine, but I did live as a young man for most of my life, and I've lived among men and boys for all of it. Shoujo contains stories that are focused on emotional intimacy and a more down-to-earth take on self-improvement than shonen, or at least battle shonen anime. None of that is unrelatable to someone based on their gender. So today I'd like to take a look at some of the shoujo manga and anime I've watched and read over the past few years, and talk about my experiences with them. Regardless of what your gender may be, dear viewer, I ask that you take this video as an attempt to create some discussion about an often misunderstood demographic of manga and anime. In other words, an attempt at understanding, from me to you. I will resist the urge to quote the meme. Real quick though, before we begin, I'd like to shout out my channel members, Sydney McDaniel3388 and the Princess Marika. Thank you so very much. Starting off, we have the most obvious starting place for shoujo manga and anime. Sailor Moon. Crystal. I know. A lot of anime fans still think of the 90s Sailor Moon anime when the name is mentioned, and I understand why it's so legendary, especially for shoujo anime. But it's over 200 episodes long, and after I found out that Crystal was more faithful to the original manga a la FMA Brotherhood or Hunter x Hunter 2011, I decided it would be my first foray into this franchise, and what I found was interesting. I am happy that it was my introduction to Sailor Moon, but I've learned that fan opinions on this series are a bit mixed. Many prefer the 90s anime, which was a very loose adaptation that made a lot of stuff up for the sake of episodic events, and if you prefer it, good for you. But if you're familiar with my channel, you know I like stories that are planned out from the beginning and build up to the climax. Sailor Moon Crystal and the manga, which I have read some of, do that. The first arc takes just enough time to introduce each of the Sailor Guardians, and in the anime, it gives them each an enemy to fend off. But it also sets up the mystery of who Tuxedo Mask really is, and the connection he seems to have with Sailor Moon. Each of the Sailor Guardians begin as schoolgirls with emotional problems. Usagi Tsukino, literally Rabbit of the Moon in Japanese, is a self-admitted crybaby who has to step up and defeat each villain of the week. But the early episodes also have her helping each of the girls, who become the other Sailor Guardians, with their problems, often by being the friend that they didn't have, thus causing each of them to develop some loyalty as they continue to stand up to the villains of the week. It's all rather simple. Sailor Moon is one of the simplest narratives I've ever consumed in any medium, but to Takeuchi and Toei's credit, the story still works. The characters aren't especially complex, but they don't need to be. They're still appealing for their distinct emotional struggles, something that remains the case even as later seasons gave them new individual challenges. And then they largely got pushed aside as newer, more powerful characters get introduced. But again, the story was written with this in mind, so somehow it works. I'll get to this more later, but the point of each encounter isn't really about who wins and why. The focus is more on how the Sailor Guardians deal with their personal issues, often with Usagi helping them through it. And that stays the same even as their personal issues become more and more about their Sailor Guardian duties, and as more characters like Chibiusa and the Outer Planet Sailor Guardians are added. And each of them, Chibiusa especially, get their own character arcs. As for the movies, I wasn't a huge fan of the Eternal movie, aka the adaptation of the 4th arc of the manga, and apparently I'm not alone in that. The Cosmos movie, on the other hand, freaking blew me away. Like, I watched the trailer for it so many times just so I could listen to Suki no Hana over and over again, long before it came out. And when it did come out, it had me on the edge of my seat. Sailor Galaxia is a villain I found out about in advance thanks to Death Battle, so I knew the amount of damage she could do. And the whole time the fight against her seems incredibly dire, and that's without all the existential dread from the plot reveals. I won't spoil the climax and the ending, but it shows just how bright Sailor Moon will shine in one of the darkest climaxes I've ever seen. When I finished it, I sat on the side of my bed and contemplated life for a few minutes before a realization I had about how influential this story was snapped me out of it. All things considered, my experience with Sailor Moon Crystal was a very positive one. Not all of it works for me, and it's definitely not for everyone, but there's enough here that I understand why it means so much to so many people. Heck, it's important to me because of the emotional roller coaster the climax of each arc, minus the Eternal movie, was for me. And it served as a great introduction to the world of shoujo manga and anime, at least for me. I've only dipped my toes into the magical girl genre a bit outside of Sailor Moon. I really ought to give Madoka a try at some point. I have seen a small fraction of Cardcaptors, which I personally found even simpler than Sailor Moon, and it had a main character who came from a teacher-student relationship, though I liked most of what I saw, but I'm not sure if I'll return to it anytime soon. Regardless, the central romance wasn't really a driving factor in my enjoyment of either of them. Romance is an extremely popular genre across all of fiction, and it often makes its way into other genres. And with my being Aero A-Spec, the genre is hit or miss for me. To get into the specifics of this, if you don't know, I'm asexual and demi-romantic, meaning that I'm really not into sex, and I find the world's overemphasis on it to be kind of ridiculous. But it is possible for me to feel romantic attraction to someone after forming an emotional bond. I won't reveal too much about my personal life, but I have had crushes before. Which is to say, romance is a genre that only really appeals to me if it's part of a greater story and makes sense for the characters involved and their arcs. And not every romance story, particularly romantic subplots, are written with this level of nuance or depth. But I have found a few romance stories, typically stories focused on romance, that have managed to work for me. Shojo, notably, is synonymous with romance to the point where some think that that is all the demographic is. And while that is not true, more on this later, a lot of the more famous shoujo manga are romance manga, and the second shoujo anime I really got into happened to be one, and it really helped me learn to love the genre a fair bit more. Snow White with the Red Hair is an anime I saw clips of on YouTube, and it looked really charming. Cozy, even. This was long before I found out it was a shoujo romance series. Sailor Moon is a classic that I never had many qualms about watching, but Snow White with the Red Hair was the first series that led me to the epiphany I talked about in the intro of this video regarding gender roles no longer being a barrier for me. It was the first time I really committed to the idea of watching shoujo anime. And despite the fact that I have now caught up to the manga and have been hit with the realization that it's unfinished, I'm happy with what I got. Taking a closer look, Snow White with the Red Hair starts off with this girl, Shirayuki, literally Snow White in Japanese. She's an herbalist living in a pseudo-medieval European country. One day, she gets noticed by the local Prince Raj for her bright red hair, and he tries to bring her in as his concubine and immediately leaves town and runs into a man from a neighboring nation. He ends up taking a poison apple, because it's a Snow White story, of course there's a poison apple, and Shirayuki briefly goes back to the prince, only for the man with her turning out to be Zen Wisteria, the prince of the neighboring nation of Clariness, and he helps free her from Prince Raj. And they get the cure for the poison in the process, thus leading to Shirayuki becoming an herbalist in his home castle. Hijinks ensue, ranging from people wanting Shirayuki's hair, to people questioning her merit, to political machinations. A lot of the early arcs basically boil down to Shirayuki doing what she wants and not giving a shit about classism, often proving herself to skeptics, including Zen's enigmatic older brother Izana. But as the series goes on, it slowly expands in scope and becomes a much larger journey about each member of its main cast over the course of their lives. Shirayuki and Zen are there, of course, but there's also Zen's retainers, Kiki and Mitsuhide, his brother Izana, and even Prince Raj, who gets some surprising character development later on. Shirayuki and Zen's relationship, which any viewer could see coming a mile away, progresses relatively slowly, but it's still pretty satisfying to watch. No instant love, just more realistic progression. When it finally does come at a rather unexpected point in the story, it makes sense and doesn't come at a convenient time for the rest of the plot. This series, rather fittingly, was also my first exposure to the level of emotional depth shoujo manga can have. Even relatively minor characters who don't appear after the arc they are introduced in get their feelings focused on, at least for one episode of the anime or a handful of chapters of the manga. It made me grow to love shoujo anime and manga significantly more than even what Sailor Moon could have. This series, and arguably the two I'm about to get to, became something of a comfort watch for me. Even now, I find watching the opening relaxes me. It's like a warm hug. The arcs in the manga beyond where the anime ends get a lot bigger and a lot longer. It's kind of tiring compared to how casually enjoyable I found the earlier arcs, but the emotional depth is still there, even as the dramatic moments become more frequent. That said, having read up to the end of volume 26, I have no idea when or how this story is going to end. But despite my huge personal issues with unfinished stories, I am surprisingly not too angry here, as both of the leads are already on board with the relationship and just need to find the time to make it work. Even with that and a few other problems, Snow-White with the Red Hair is a very enjoyable and even cozy story. Okay, the next anime is one that I had heard about prior, but wasn't aware of the sheer magnitude of its reputation. It's yet another more faithful remake, a la Brotherhood, that I decided to watch because of it being a more faithful adaptation of the manga, and it actually managed to finish its story, which the original did not. Fruits Basket is my favorite shoujo anime. I mean, I like all of the others I'm going to talk about for different reasons that I will get to, but Fruits Basket by far left the biggest impact on me, and is the only series in this video that managed to make it into my top 5 favorite anime of all time. I started watching it on a whim because it was there on Crunchyroll and my interest was piqued. I knew it was about a girl named Toru Honda who moves in with a family that each turn into one of the animals from the Chinese zodiac, including the cat because of an old legend where the rat tricked the cat out of the zodiac race. But I was not at all prepared for how dramatic and even heart-wrenching this story was going to become. Let's begin at the beginning, shall we? Toru Honda is a Japanese high school girl living in a tent after the death of her mom because she doesn't want to be around her extended family. She gets found out by the people who own the land, the Soma family, and her tent gets buried in a landslide, thus forcing her to live with them. But she soon discovers that the Somas aren't exactly a normal family. If any of them are hugged by someone of the opposite sex or are in a weakened state, they turn into one of the animals on the Chinese zodiac calendar. Among them are Shigure, an eccentric, kind, and rebellious man who turns into the dog, Yuki, a soft-spoken high school boy who's very popular in his class and turns into the rat, and Kyo, a hot-headed martial arts student who really wants to beat Yuki, but has never managed to do so. Oh, and he's the one who turns into the cat for the reasons I mentioned before. The story starts out as simple slice-of-life shenanigans with Toru going to school with the boys and getting to know the other members of the Soma family. But as the series goes on, it's continually implied that the Somas all suffer from serious trauma in one form or another, be it from the fact that they cannot get close to someone without risking the family's secret being exposed, someone finding their transformation repulsive, or even abuse from other family members. Through all of this, Toru acts as their emotional support, often saying things to them that they really need to hear, not judging them when they show how closed off they are, and offering them the affection they were denied for circumstances beyond their control. Something she does to all members of the Soma family, even those who wrong her, while also revealing that she isn't a one-note ray of sunshine, and has some trauma of her own to work through, which the boys are eager to help with to return the favor. I really cannot do the story justice without getting into massive spoilers. This series pulls no punches in exploring the amount of emotional pain its characters are in. All of them have been burned in one way or another, and healing from that pain is no easy feat. It takes time, work, and a lot of support, but it can be done. Emotional scars are not healed in a single moment, or even in a month. They take years of self-improvement, but they can be healed. And as time goes on, the characters and the world around them do change. Each member of the Soma family and Toru are completely different at the end of the series compared to how they were at the beginning, and it's really satisfying to see how far they've come. I know the series is technically a romance, and it does indeed end with Toru getting one of the guys at the end, and I'm not going to tell you which one. But honestly, it felt more like a drama with romance elements, kinda like the opposite of what Snow White with the red hair is. As I was watching it, I would often describe it as 10% romance and 90% therapy session, to the point where I would especially recommend it to anyone who has suffered from childhood trauma. Don't use it as a substitute for therapy. If you need therapy, get therapy, and if you can't afford therapy, go to a support group or call a mental health hotline. But back to Fruits Basket. It's easy to see why this is my favorite shoujo manga or anime. It goes to places far darker than I ever imagined, every bit as tormentous as your average battle shonen climax, yet it never loses its emotional depth and emphasis on its characters' journeys towards healing from their trauma. I also think it demonstrates that romance doesn't need to be as all-encompassing as the stereotype of the genre may suggest. To use a shonen example, Komi Can't Communicate is technically a romance anime, but most of us watch it for the wholesome comedic slice-of-life journey of its title character trying to make friends. And speaking of anime about super anxious high school girls forming connections, and here we are from a few obvious favorites to the most basic shoujo romance I will talk about today. Though to be fair to Kimi ni Todoke, or From Me to You, there is a bit of an asterisk on that. At first, From Me to You is the story of this girl, Sawako Kuronuma, as she moves through high school with her friends. The twist starts with her name. It sounds like Sadako, the name of the ghost girl from The Ring, which, when combined with her looks, quickly got her classmates using Sadako as a nickname so much that many don't know what her real name is. Also, she has social anxiety. Yeah, I've seen this series compared to the likes of Bocchi and of course Komi before. And to be fair, those comparisons are warranted. From Me to You is in many ways a shoujo equivalent to Komi Can't Communicate, in that it's not from the perspective of the boy helping her, and is more focused on how Sawako pulls herself out of a bad situation. Though she doesn't appear to have a communication disorder passed through her family like Komi, she does have other problems. But after the first season of the anime, Sawako has largely moved past this issue, and is now onto more typical high school problems such as career prospects. Her social anxiety may still be there, and it does come up from time to time, such as when Sawako struggles to find the right moment to give the aforementioned boy a gift on Valentine's Day, or when she wants to consider becoming a teacher, but she doesn't struggle to get a few words out like she used to. But she isn't the only character who has trouble communicating. Pretty early on in the series, she makes friends with two girls named Ayane Yano and Chizuru Yoshida, who eventually grow into fully fledged secondary protagonists in their own right, each with their own romantic subplots that tie in with their character arcs about growing up. Because yes, of all the series I'm going to be talking about in this video, romance is the most front and center with this one. The boy that helps Sawako, Shotakaze Haya, was an obvious love interest from the beginning, and both Ayane and Chizu get their own love interests down the line. If you started reading or watching this series because of Sawako's journey to overcome her social anxiety, the series might lose you later on, unless you've come to care about the characters and their journeys, like I did. That's really all I have to say about From Me to You. It's definitely one of the more typical high school anime out there, and even one of the more typical shoujo romance anime out there, but as someone who likes good character arcs, especially about characters overcoming social anxiety, it's enjoyable. Now moving on to something that is a little less typical, but still a classic. Whether or not Revolutionary Girl Utena counts as a magical girl anime is hotly debated. I am not an authority in that particular issue, but I do 100% see why it's considered a classic. Classic anime are hit or miss for me. I respect and appreciate series like Cowboy Bebop in the 80s were on my half more than I'd say I enjoy them. But I have found myself enjoying series like Neon Genesis Evangelion and Revolutionary Girl Utena, even when they have movies that are weird as shit. Especially when they have movies like that. Actually, Eva is a pretty good comparison since it also deconstructs a popular genre. Revolutionary Girl Utena, meanwhile, is a deconstruction of fairy tale and magical girl tropes. specifically regarding the noble prince who saves the princess. It's also really surreal and vague even compared to other classic anime. So, what the fuck is it even about? Well, it starts with this girl, Utena Tenjo, who was helped out of an oppressive state by a prince after her parents died. Utena was so moved by this that she vowed to become a prince herself someday, a noble prince who saves princesses. So when she shows up at Otori Academy, she's wearing a boy's uniform and is very chivalrous, but she ends up in a duel that she doesn't realize is a sword duel against one of the members of the student council for the hand of this girl, Anthe Himemia, also known as the Rose Bride. Against all odds, she wins the duel and Anthe ends up moving in with her. From there, Utena is challenged by every member of the student council, sometimes more than once for Anthe's hand. Sometimes it's difficult for her, but she always finds a way to come out on top in the end. Each duelist, however, is racked with emotional problems often relating to identity and self-worth, and their defeat often leads to a positive turn in their character arc. It doesn't happen with all the duelists, some of them remain assholes at least a little longer, but the series slowly reveals that the student council are receiving communication from a being called End of the World, who appears to be the one who orchestrated the whole Rose Bride tournament in the first place. Utena winning Anthe has thrown a wrench into his plans, so he tries to get the members of the student council to win her back. Then, towards the end of the series, the truth about him, and by extension the Rose Bride, starts to get revealed. I won't spoil the finale, but I will say it was a very satisfying conclusion when I stopped to think about it, despite how surreal it was. Now, me being me, I guess I should talk about the gay. I've already talked about the queerness present in Sailor Moon and Fruits Basket, but since this is my first time talking about Utena, I guess I'd better acknowledge it. This is one of the earliest Yuri, Gia, lesbian, or whatever you want to call it, relationships in anime. With Utena's presentation, one might assume that there is some gender stuff in there too, but that's more of Utena being gender non-conforming, as she continues to assert that she's a girl despite calling herself a prince. Her and Anthe are quite the endearing couple, especially when something comes along to challenge them. Anthe doesn't really seem to have any feelings of her own, and just goes along with whoever happens to win the duel. That is until Utena aggressively tries to get her to care about herself, to have an identity aside from being a prize to be won, and as such, they grow to care about each other, thus leading to them wanting a future together. And I guess I should talk about the movie. The movie retreads a lot of ideas and plot beats from the show. Some are better with a different twist, some are worse because of the time constraint, and some are weird. Minor spoiler warning, Utena turns into a car in the climax. Why? I will never know. Though the ending of the movie was still pretty satisfying, despite the retread of plot points and themes and how surreal they both are. I think there's value in watching both the anime and the movie to get the complete picture. I guess it really is like Evangelion in a lot of ways. Now, to wrap this up, I'd like to end on a series that's a bit more modern and a bit more action-oriented for those who are coming to this video but are still hopped up on the shonen hype train. Yona of the Dawn. I had heard of this one prior, but I knew very little about the plot, aside from it being a more action-oriented manga about this redhead with an army. The first episode really caught me off guard, starting with a simple romance plot with a naive princess, only to aggressively rip that away by having the supposed love interest, Suwan, killing Yona's father, King Eel, thus forcing her to flee with the help of General Hawk, the only person in the castle still loyal to her. Yona is about as unprepared as you could possibly be for someone in her position. Hawk is able to get her to safety, but it's pretty clear that she needs to get a lot stronger and build up support from powerful people if she wants to take the kingdom back. Also, maybe fulfill a prophecy about 4 dragon warriors who will support her. Yona starts off needing Hawk to take care of her and protect her, but right from the beginning of her arc, she expresses the desire to get stronger so she can protect the people she loves, understanding that she needs to grow past her sheltered princess upbringing. This of course leads to her learning how to use a bow and arrow and starting to build up a party. Said party consists of Hawk, of course, a boy named Yoon, who was orphaned at a young age and was raised by a priest, and 4 dragon warriors. The dragon warriors are the successors of people who were granted powers by dragon gods long ago for the purpose of protecting a red dragon king, a former dragon god who descended from the heavens. The implication being that Yona is the red dragon king, judging from the way the dragon warriors have reacted to meeting her. They are Gija, the white dragon, who has the hand or rather claws of a dragon with a strength of 10 men, he was raised pretty isolated from the world and joined Yona's quest very readily, though he took some time to adjust to the group. Shinha, the blue dragon, who has the eyes of a dragon that can see far away even in the dark. He grew up in an isolated community in a cave that feared him due to a rumor that he can turn people to stone with his eyes. But then he met Yona, who treated him with kindness, which led to him joining the party. He didn't even have a name aside from Blue Dragon until Yona decided to give him one. Jinha, the green dragon, has the leg of a dragon that lets him Spider-Man jump and kick with tremendous force. He was the most resistant to joining Yona's party thus far. He was on the run for most of his life and resents the idea that he's destined to serve the Red Dragon King. But he's also taken off guard when he actually does meet Yona when she shows up, because he was expecting a mighty jerk of a king, not a small, kind, and determined girl. Thus she is able to win him over once he comes to understand her. And finally Zeno, the yellow dragon, who is pretty carefree and likes food, but doesn't seem to be showing off any powers thus far. Most of the early arcs revolve around Yona and friends recruiting people to their cause, while avoiding outing themselves to Suwon and his forces, along with fighting the occasional skirmish. Hawk plus the dragons do most of the fighting. Yoon has a number of skills such as medical aid and meal prep that benefit the group. Yona helps however she can, and as time goes on, she gets better at handling combat situations. And even from the start, it's pretty clear that she is what you may call the heart of the team. She has very good emotional intelligence and does her best for people despite her lack of experience with the world. And it's pretty clear why she's the leader of the team. And it's not because she's a princess, nor is it because of her status as the Red Dragon. It's because she brought them all together. She knows how to connect emotionally with each member of the party, and make it so they want to follow her. And when she gets serious, people around her tend to notice. Taking a step back, overall this series does a very good job at balancing the drama with the action, in both the anime and the manga. The action scenes are appropriately tense and very exciting, and the emotional scenes tug on your heartstrings. Yona of the Dawn is quite the long series, so my view of it may change by the end, but I'm extremely happy even with the fraction of the story I've read and watched thus far. It's probably my favorite series I've discussed in the video, aside from Fruits Basket, for now. But there is one key factor regarding this anime and other more action-focused series I've discussed in this video that I feel is worth bringing up. The factor that distinguished them from your average shonen battle anime. The power fantasy and or the action are never the point. Let me explain. All but 2 of the anime discussed in this video have some form of recurring action scenes, be it battles of magic or sword duels, yet none of them had the same feel as your average battle shonen. Why is that? Well, the point of the story is never about the battles. It's about the emotions and arcs of the characters. It's not about training and getting stronger, it's about personal growth. You don't see Utena or the Sailor Guardians training specific techniques or more powerful moves for the sake of defeating stronger opponents. They just take the plunge when they need to. Yes, the Sailor Guardians have moves they call out in the middle of a fight, but it's almost always the same attacks, and those attacks don't do much aside from hit the enemy. And if they get a new transformation, it's for story reasons and not because they trained for it or figured out a new way to use their abilities. Utena almost always wins the duels for the Rose Bride, and she only falters whenever she doubts herself. The battles in Snow White with the red hair tend to be an afterthought or at least secondary to the main plot. Minor spoilers for Fruits Basket, but Kyo wants to beat Yuki from his first appearance in the series. And I thought that maybe this would lead to him not beating him in martial arts, but in winning Toru's affection. And this turned out to not be the case, as he just stops caring as much about surpassing Yuki at something and becomes more content with himself as he is. The one that comes the closest to shonen battle style training for better powers is Yona, but that's less about individual strength and more about building up her army. The abilities of the Dragon Warriors tend to be just one thing, and while each of their things is impressive certainly, they aren't really unlocking new abilities or training to take down whole armies on their own. Each of them is powerful, but not insurmountable, even for normal human soldiers if they're skilled enough. Combat in these series still exists, but the way the story uses it is a lot more down to earth. Like I said at the beginning of this video, it's not really about giving the reader or watchers something to fantasize about, it's about character. And that's why each of the leading ladies in these series have something else in common. They're the heart of their stories, they are the emotional center of the group. They inspire and lift up each of the other main characters, help people when they need it, and some of them even win over their enemies. This doesn't exactly apply to Utena, but she does win almost every battle by virtue of being the most emotionally mature character, and the duelists who lose to her often become better people after their duels. And even then, she does a lot to try to lift up Anthe and anyone else that she can. And that's where a lot of the emotional depth of these series comes from, acknowledging that we all have problems in one form or another. It's okay to feel however you feel. It's okay to need time to grow. It's okay to make mistakes. And it's okay to need help sometimes. That's not to say that there's no emotional depth to shonen or that it lacks protagonists who help others with their emotional problems, but in a mirror of what I just said about shoujo, the emotional depth is not the point. Characters like Luffy, Deku, and Tanjiro do help their friends and in some cases even their enemies with their emotional problems, but it's usually done through combat. Heck, one of the best moments in early One Piece is Luffy helping Nami escape Arlong. But unlike the rest of his crew, Luffy has no idea what the problem is. He only understands that a member of his crew is crying and needs help. Deku may have reached Uraraka, Todoroki, Ida, and, spoilers for the end of the series, Shigaraki, but he often did so by fighting them and showing them his drive and saving them if need be. With Todoroki, he did it by shouting his point in. Tanjiro probably comes the closest to the shoujo protagonist discussed here. He is one of the few shonen protags created by a woman. But Demon Slayer is still a battle shonen, so the fights and training for them are a much greater focus. But it's also the least akin to the typical power fantasy of the shonen heroes I just discussed, since the heroes in this series only have sword and breathing techniques, whereas the villains have all manner of superpowers. None of that is to discredit any of those series, far from it, since I adore each of them. All I'm saying is that each of these series in these demographics have different strengths, and one isn't necessarily better than the other. With all that said, why isn't shoujo more popular or respected? Well, I hate saying this, but it clearly comes down to toxic masculinity. Women and girls are more willing to check out shonen and seinen series, yet the reverse is not true. Because among boys and men, there is this pressure to not appear feminine or enjoy things aimed at girls for fear of being branded unmanly. And if the opening of this video didn't make it obvious, that's a shame to me. Anyone who does this is deliberately missing out on some great stories that have strengths to offer. If you're a shonen bro and somehow made it this far into the video, first of all, thank you. Second of all, consider taking this as an opportunity to give shoujo a try. Maybe start with Yona of the Dawn for its greater focus on action, or perhaps Fruits Basket for its focus on healing from trauma, or From Me to You for its story about social anxiety. Or one of the other series I talked about in this video if what I said about them intrigues you. Femininity, or the feminine perspective, isn't something to be avoided, no matter where someone sits on the gender spectrum. Gender is a social construct, yes. What is considered feminine or masculine at one point may be reversed at another. But it still affects our society and how we see ourselves. And no matter who we are, we always have a blend of what you could call masculine and feminine traits within us, whether or not we acknowledge it. I know that sounds a bit hollow coming from someone who's literally bigender, but I'd argue it's pretty telling that some of the most successful shonen and seinen series, especially in recent memory, were created by women. Maybe the blend of masculine and feminine qualities offer these series a broader appeal, and that's part of the reason why they are so popular and beloved. I'm hoping Yona Season 2 can help elevate it to greater success, and then it may have a similar effect. But for now, that's all from me. I'm Kylan Mythos, and I'll see you all next time.